It is a little bit after 7, and I'm going to call the meeting to order, beginning with taking attendance. Mike Fisher. Are you here, Mike?
Here. Sorry.
David Salvatore.
Here.
Myself, I'm here. Nancy Gallivan.
Here.
Mark Breen. No. Jennifer Josephs.
Here.
Bridget Goff.
Here.
Don Anderson.
Here.
Jack Conroy. No. Jeff Fisher. No. Jack Fisher.
Here.
Edward Connor. No.
Yes.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Okay. Bill Hahn.
Here.
Boris Senek.
Here.
Katia Santiago Taylor.
Here.
And I guess the others are non-voting. So with that, for Governor Baker's order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, General Law 30A, Section 20, the public will not be allowed to physically access the school building committee meeting. Members of the public will be able to view this meeting on the Walpole Media Cable Access. The school building committee reserves the right to implement additional remote participation procedures and will notify the public of these procedures as soon as practicable. Citizens with a question or comment should email mmortali@walpole.k12.ma.us. At this point, I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the minutes of April 13, 2021.
So moved.
Have a second?
I'll second. Susan.
Okay. I have a motion to approve and a second. Any discussion before I call for votes? Hearing none. If you are voting to approve the minutes, please say aye. Mike Fisher.
Aye.
David Salvatore.
Aye.
Myself, aye. Nancy Gallivan.
Aye.
Jennifer Josephs.
Abstain.
Okay. Dr. Goff.
Aye.
Don Anderson.
Aye.
Jack's not here. Jeff's not here. Jack Fisher.
Aye.
Ed Connor. Edward Connor.
I don't know if Ed can hear us. Ed, can you hear us?
You can put it in the chat.
All right, I'll come back to Ed. Bill Hahn.
Dane.
Abstain. Okay. Boris Senek.
Aye.
Katia Santiago Taylor.
I'm having trouble opening them, so abstain, I guess.
Abstain.
Yes, I can't open them.
Okay, so I'm just going to circle back to Edward Connor. Can you hear us?
You can hear us. You can just give a thumbs up.
He cannot hear us. I just texted.
Sorry.
Text and ask him to give a thumbs up if he approves the minutes.
Okay, can we have a thumbs up if you're approving the minutes? I can't see him.
I just sent on the text, so give him a second. There you go. There's the thumbs up.
There we go.
Got it. Okay, 1, 2. So 9 approving, 3 abstaining. The minutes are approved. And the next item on the agenda is discussion of the high performance new buildings. And so I'm going to turn it over to our consultants to walk us through that. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take it from here and I'll give a little preamble. So for tonight, we have some more work to discuss related to our schematic design that's in progress right now. We've been working on this, and as you all know, we'll be working on it right up until 4th of July and even slightly beyond to get it into the MSBA. So tonight's big discussion will be on MEP systems overview and on sustainability. We do have a few small items to take care of ahead of that. In the way of a quick MSBA update, the MSBA voted on April 14th to approve our PSR. So right now we currently are completed with the PSR stage, and that also kind of officially 100% wraps us up out of feasibility. So now we are officially launched forward in the schematic design process, which for the group here is no surprise. We've been working on that pretty diligently since we submitted PSR. There was a little bit of admin work in getting some ballot language over to the MSBA. They did look at it, made one small tweak, and then now it's gone to the school committee to have a look and to send it to the select board for their moving it forward onto the ballot. So a lot of work is being done, like I said, in schematic behind the scenes. So we appreciate everyone's efforts on that. Another update is this past week and the week before, TAPE's been working with their consultants on user group meetings. So many of you have probably attended these. We've been using the project team also in the last couple of weeks, those meetings, to have reviews by like police and fire, the facilities, DPW, and like I said, Chris has been meeting with different members on the district staff and coming up with programming needs, and ultimately Chris will eventually discuss this, but we will have some data that's collected for each room type. And so that's just continued work that goes into refining the plans and making sure no scope is missed as we go into estimating, which is coming up middle of this month. Tonight, we have quite a bit to cover. One of the big topics, which tonight was dedicated to, is mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, an overview of those systems and how, more importantly, those are affected by our sustainability goals and our energy efficiency goals. So that's a presentation that Chris will give. He has his consultants here with him tonight. From Griffith and Very is Wayne Matson, and I'll let him introduce the rest of his team. Then after that presentation, we're going to double back to the construction delivery methods topic, which we talked about quite a bit at our last meeting in April, related to either going design, bid, build, or construction manager at risk. We have a tiny bit more data to present related to that, and hopefully get to a vote on that tonight. So without further ado,
Tony?
Yep.
Just one quick one. If there's a draft available of the ballot question, would you send it around to the committee?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I will do that during this meeting, during Chris's presentation. All right, so like I said, we do have quite a bit to cover with mechanical systems. So I will turn over to Chris now. He has a presentation which he will share. So I'll stop sharing. And if you want to just introduce your team, Chris, and then we'll get right to it.
For sure, thanks. I'm gonna just pull up the presentation here and put it in slideshow, and then I'll introduce the team. So the team that's with me, can you see that slideshow?
Yeah, but you have the black screen on the black box.
On the left here.
On the right, yep.
All right, yeah, okay. I'm gonna leave that open for a second because I need to see my team, but then I'll close it when I start. So with me tonight, from my office, Charlie Hay, who you've met before, one of the other principals at TAPE, and then Cesar Dedios, who is another principal at TAPE, who sort of really directs our sustainability and quality and technical side of the practice. And so he's got a wealth of knowledge, and he's here to answer questions that you might have relative to approach and results. We have Wayne Matson from Griffith and Very. Griffith and Very is doing the mechanical systems, which is it's HVAC specifically. Also with us tonight is Mike Doyle from Architectural Engineers. And Mike, who all is here from your team? I know Elise is here.
Yeah, Elise Portnover is covering the electrical side. I'll be covering plumbing, fire if there's anything.
Okay. And did I miss anybody from Griffith and Very or anybody else here from my team that I can't see?
Is Bill Buckley from your team?
No, not that I know of. Okay, so that sets the landscape of who's here. So I'm gonna minimize this black screen here, and assuming that that's good to go, I'm gonna just carry on. So I wanted to start this conversation with just sort of outlining where we are in terms of the project. And the town of Walpole back in October voted in the Green Communities Act, which basically means you're under the stretch code now instead of the basic code. And that just essentially means that we need to perform 10% better than the base 2018 Energy Conservation Code. And so that's sort of the baseline, and that came into effect starting January 1st of 2021. And for the most part, that code is going to apply mostly to residential in Walpole. But buildings, commercial buildings over 100,000 square feet get kicked into the stretch code as well. And so by default, we're already kicked into stretch code, which is 10% better than code. And I understand that this is the sort of first major project the town is going to wrestle with through that process. And there you are right there with Walpole. The second criteria or rail that we have is the MSBA's Green School Program, which on its base requires that all projects in the state need to register for it's LEED for schools, that's the LEED-S, or New England, CHPS we call CHIPS, that just is an acronym for the Collaborative for High Performance Schools. So either of those programs we're required to register for, and we have to exceed Massachusetts Energy Base Code by 10%. So effectively what the MSBA does is says, we don't care if a community is a green community and operating off the stretch code. They've equalized all towns together that come into the MSBA's program and just said everybody's going to be on stretch code no matter what. So that's sort of the baseline. But the first paragraph on the top is what we've always been carrying in all of the cost data and assumptions and budgets that Brian and his team have done, is that the MSBA's Green School Program, they provide another incentive to the district to, if we can increase the energy efficiency by 20% and also achieve a minimum of LEED Silver, then we can get an additional 2% points of reimbursement, 2% of the eligible cost. And so in a minute, you'll see what that sort of translates to in some number figures for your use. So to sort of summarize, we have these rails that we're operating within, and previously we had made as a group the determination that we really wanted to pursue the 2 additional reimbursement points. And so hopefully tonight we can reaffirm that commitment and sort of move forward so that the design team can finish schematic design. So what are the targets that we can achieve? So we just talked about how base code is off the table. We talked about how stretch code is bettering the IECC 2018 by 10%. So the downward arrow is representing that we're using less energy to the tune of 10% less. We can go for the MSBA 2% reimbursement, and that's bettering the energy by using 20% less. Or we can try to get some of the other incentives that are out there beyond the MSBA's reimbursement, like Eversource or something like that, that really require a whole host of other things other than just elements that we can put into the building, but things like renewable energy on site, like solar or ground source heat pumps or wind, some stuff like that. We have to harvest energy somehow on site to really get that energy used down low enough to get into the category of other incentives. And so where does that rate or sit relative to the LEED program? So LEED certified, which is the basic level that the MSBA requires, is basically somewhere around stretch code, but not the 2% reimbursement level. So it's somewhere about in that zone. And then LEED Silver on version 4, LEED version 4, is somewhere on the other side of the MSBA's 2% reimbursement range. So we have this sort of identified map of all of the things that we could try to achieve here. And as a caveat, I just want to highlight that on next door in Sharon, Tape is the architect of record, and we just this week got back the energy models for the 100% complete design of that. And where we designed the project to meet the 2% reimbursement rate for the MSBA, at the end of the day, when all of the energy got put in, all of the design got put into it and everything, we actually ended up sort of closer to the lower side of the MSBA range. We're still going to meet LEED Silver, but the point in bringing this up is that all of the codes changed and are in process of being changed. There's been a little bit of a pause in that due to COVID, but they're all changing, and the bar got I don't know, you can't say got raised necessarily, but the energy bar got lowered. So all of these 10%, 20% numbers are driving the energy efficiencies even more, right? So the reason to highlight this is because we think that we've learned a lot of lessons on Sharon that we've started to include in the PSR estimates. And we believe will go a long way to getting you to the MSBA's 2% point. But we do believe that there may be a little bit of a gap that we need to cover in terms of additional strategies and things like that we have to make sure we're in tune with so that we don't end up surprised later and miss the mark. 19.8% better than code just barely misses that 2 percentage point reimbursement, right? So we got to make sure we hit it. So how do we get there? The thing that we've kind of boiled it down to is that you need to use less, which has 3 components of envelope efficiency and use. And we need to produce more. And those are the 2 big things to consider. And then on the periphery of that, which is becoming more and more attainable, is the discussion of storage with battery arrays and things like that. Still not super prominent, but it's coming very fast down the pipe into projects all around us. So as we look towards all of that, that's sort of how do we get there. And I want to pause for a second and say all of this assumes that that you all had a chance to look at the webinar PDF that Compass had forwarded. And inside of that webinar, you noticed that the state has a lot of bills that have been approved and initiatives out there that are only going to make all of this stuff get more stringent. And so the reality is that the state as a whole and all these communities are really driving down everything with a big intensity. So we can't do things like we used to do. We're always constantly trying to do better and drive things down and down and down. So with regard to the envelope, the stretch code kind of implies that you're going to have walls of a certain R value. R value is just thermal resistance, and the higher the R value, the better. And so the R value of around 16 for walls, around 36 for roof, and then windows, 38 or better. The U value you want lower. So R value, the higher the better. U value, the lower the better. And the amount of glazing you put in there helps with that as well. So stretch code is good, and it's a really good program. It is way better than the base code. And then we go the next step to the MSBA's 2%. And the walls are going to start getting super insulated, or towards super insulated, with R24, R25, somewhere in there. And our rough estatements after speaking with the cost estimators in prep for this meeting, we think that somewhere around an additional $3 per square foot. What that really is we're sort of changing some of the structure and placement of different types of insulation, but we're effectively trying to build up that R value. On the roofs, we're looking for a minimum of R45, which might add around $2 per square foot, just talking insulation, not all the other components. And then for the windows, we're looking for R values of, minimum R30, but hopefully much lower than that, getting down to the 20s or 28, and that it really has to be triple glazed to get there. And so that's really, a lot of those strategies are built in already to the cost estimates that we have, and if not fully there, we think we can accommodate through the design and pricing contingency that is set up in PSR that helps get us through the process, saying we didn't know it then, but now we do. So we don't think that that's really a budget problem yet to get to the MSBA 2%. But like I said, that would get us to that sort of baseline of what we accomplished in Sharon, which makes us nervous that by the time we get through the design of this project with all the changing bars and codes, we may have to do a little bit more. And so at the bottom of that column, you can see the 2% eligible cost kind of translates into about $1.3 million in additional money reimbursed to the town based on that $67 million of eligible cost. And then when you shift from that middle column over to the right, you get into the incentives realm, and you're talking R values that are greater than R30 for the walls, greater than R56 for the roofs, and triple glazing that is lower than the 23 for the fully assembled unit. And again, triple glazed with probably different gas fillings in between the glazing of those units. And so what's the incentive there? There's likely more incentives than what I listed, but we've already had a conversation with Eversource, and if you can get to that level, they have incentives that are during construction about $1.25 per square foot, and post occupancy another $1, which translates to somewhere around $350,000 of additional money that could come in from different sources. And I think there's a nuance there relative to how the MSBA deals with other incentives and money that we may not need to jump into right now, but just to understand that you can continue to push the bar into better and better efficiencies past the 2% or the 20% code better, and maybe realize some additional benefits from it other than just the energy benefits and it being better for the environment.
Chris, sorry to interrupt, but to clarify, the incentives path is also what you're talking about when you talk about a net zero building?
Yeah, so Yep, I'm sorry I didn't mention that. So incentives, when you get down into that range, that's where you're starting to talk about net zero. But of course, to be net zero, you have to have some sort of renewable production associated with it to actually cut down on the energy that the building is using. So that's really kind of the big differentiator between what we're seeing at even projects that barely pass the MSBA's criteria. We're starting to see that even those projects are needing to consider some level of base renewables, maybe within the building package as part of the building project, to get over the hurdle and to be safe for that 2%. And so, and then you just do more of it for the incentive side. But yes, that's sort of the track. If you're wanting to go net zero, we would be going down the incentives route. So that's the envelope side, and this is all within that first step of use less. So the use less side is that we want to, before we turn it over to Wayne and his team and Mike and Elise and all of the fantastic engineers, we want to make sure that we're giving them less of a load to have to deal with from the mechanical side. So try to be more passive about it if we can. And so all of this factors into that. And then we jump into the efficiency side. So once the engineers take over, we have different strategies for achieving these same pathways. Okay, so the first and sort of the biggest chunk of it in reality is the HVAC chunk. And I'll toss this up and then I'm going to turn it over to Wayne so he can describe some of the differences between these systems that you see here. But the stretch code, essentially you have a lot of other options, and some of those options might be similar to what you already have or what might be, in the realm of conventional thinking, variable air volume systems, chilled beams, maybe even classroom univents, stuff like that. And that's really kind of the realm that we're coming from. And where we're going to are the more efficient systems of this middle column that are systems like variable refrigerant flow, which is VRF. You'll hear us talk a lot about VRF, and some other systems that I want Wayne to touch on. And then, of course, when you go down the route of the incentives in net zero, you're really starting to turn a corner from having any fossil fuels to going all electric. And then, like I said, having that building generation. And at the bottom of these columns, you see EUI numbers. So that's energy use intensity. And that is really just a function of the amount of energy used in the building divided by the square footage. And that's the simple way to say it. But you want that number to get as low as you can. And we know from Eversource to be in their incentives program, we have to target and meet an EUI of 25. And so the Sharon project that we just mentioned ended with an EUI of 31 is where we're sitting right now. And so we think that a target of EUI of 30 is reasonable and relative to current experience. And so Wayne, would you mind talking for a second about some of the options on these system types, and then sort of explain why we are recommending the VRF systems?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Chris. Yeah, I mean, as you improve your envelope and you make the building tighter and tighter and more, heat resistant and becomes you're building a good thermos model, then the other gains have to be picked up on the HVAC side primarily. So, as we've advanced our designs, from stretch code to the MSBA +2 and then into the incentives where we can really start to maximize the efficiency of the building, we have to kind of start looking at systems that are kind of going above and beyond what we're used to. I mean, we've been looking at, using boilers, and we've gone to high efficiency condensing gas-fired boilers, which are achieving, efficiencies in the mid upper 90s. And we've gone from, unit ventilators, which, have had their share of problems, which have been noisy, to go into VAV systems, which provide, very good system control, very good acoustics, very good thermal control. Then to advancing that to, chilled beams, which the air that's going through a chilled beam is really primarily the ventilation air that becomes the motive force for the whole HVAC system. And at that point in time, then you're moving smaller quantities of air. And then now we've taken it to the next step, which is the VRF. And the VRF system, is it has a lot of different benefits. Those even go beyond just the MSBA plus 2%. They go into benefits that put the system in alignment with the MSBA goals, which is to have a net zero potential school. It also, kind of dovetails perfectly with the recently enacted climate bill, which is, a goal of reducing, greenhouse emissions by 80% by 2050. It'll have net zero designs by 2050. So to speak a little bit about the VRF, to just take you to this level, is it's a very simple system. It's very well understood, and the benefits are like you see on this slide here. No fossil fuels, no natural gas, no oil, no propane. It already reads. It's designed for net zero potential. The key thing here: 40 to 50% efficiency improvements over standard rooftop units that already comply with 90.1. So when you're trying to get to these extra goals, these are the kind of things you have to look at. And this next one, this fourth point here, is kind of really key in school construction. That's a simultaneous heating and cooling. So you don't, as a school, don't have to decide whether the whole school is going to be in the cooling mode or in the heating mode. And with the Energy Conservation Code, we're not really supposed to be doing simultaneous heating and cooling. But with VRF, you can do that because by virtue of the system, it takes heat from those areas that want to be cooled and puts it in those areas that want to be heated. And then it provides, the excellent flexibility where owners can segregate areas of the school to be used during off hours. So if you want to have a section of school used for summer school, you have those type of things. And then we move on to the lower overall operation and maintenance costs. Now, this system is great, and there are other systems that can meet these kind of goals. I mean, we can look at a chilled beam system that uses radiant panels on the perimeter, that uses very, very complicated, demand control ventilation strategies throughout every single space of the school, that has finite controls that drill right down to the minute little areas. But you start to add a level of complexity to it that also drives the cost up. Whereas a VRF system right now, we can target anywhere between the mid and upper $30 per square foot, say $40 per square foot. When you look at these other systems that can meet the same goal, you're looking at construction costs that are $50 and even slightly over $50 a square foot. So we're trying to find that fine line between a reliable system that's robust and simple but meets these goals without driving the construction costs through the roof.
Thanks, Wayne. So the takeaway is that, and we actually had included the VRF as an assumption for the PSR phase in our narratives. Is that right, Wayne?
Yes, we have. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. So the $39 you see there per square foot is actually where your baseline is at.
That's right.
So
and that is based on recent bid costs with an escalator, understanding that this project's not going to be built this year, obviously. So these are realistic numbers right here.
And so to jump into the next lane or column or row, whatever you want to call it, the incentives path, it is, from an HVAC perspective, potentially not a super far jump, but it will have other impacts. And I think the cost of getting to those incentives is going to be more than just HVAC. So the point here is that we do recommend the VRF. I can't even say the word, so I'm just say VRF. And that's something that we see proven, and it works. And we think that it's a good fit for the target on this project. And some of the electrical items here, is really just around the fact that we'll need controls for the system. You can't, it would be great to just rely on human nature and light switches and stuff like that, but we need to have controls that will automatically turn lights off, or there's even daylight responsive controls in most of these strategies that we can dim part of the room when the daylight is the right brightness, and leave the other half of the room on, or things like that that really translate into that strategy of shedding power density when you need to, or when it's bright enough to take advantage of the passive daylight that the building is designed for, actually the orientation of the building on the site. But some of the other things we're looking at is the interior lighting, that we're looking, it'll be all LEDs to get down into the, low 40s, high 30s, or even lower in the power density, which is watts per square foot. And that's the point number, not an actual 30, it's 0.30 or 0.40 or something like that. And also sort of stipulating that we need to make sure we get all Energy Star appliances and devices that consume less electricity on the basis. And then one of the other big components to all of this is the building management system, or controls that kind of make it all work together. With stretch code, it's useful. I think most buildings have it. But when you start getting into these 20% better than code and even net zero, you're really talking about that you can't do without it. It's fully integrated. In some places, like the net zero buildings, you have automated features where they can open and close windows to get passive ventilation going when the air is right outside. And so the controls of the building sort of eliminate the folly of human error that can happen in some of these really highly efficient buildings. So that's the efficiency. And then use in production is basically the stretch code. With the use, what I mean by that is really how the building is used during the day. So this is scheduling, events, all that kind of stuff. So with stretch code, we're seeing that there's really no meaningful change. And when we do the energy models, the energy modelers actually ask us for data on how the building will be used, summers, evenings, daytime, all of that stuff. So when we talk about use, that's what we mean, and that for stretch code, you are basically required to plan for solar. For the MSBA's pathway, we see that there's some modest considerations for the use side of it. Nothing that is catastrophic or life-changing, but there's some considerations there, like maybe arrival times or start times, or even different parts of the building that you don't use as much in the evenings, or places that get better sunlight that you can use without as much electric lighting. You start talking about the peak loads and shedding of some systems. So that's just how we've termed some things that we can actually have shut down by the controls. And sort of the way I like to talk about it is you can put some parts of the building to sleep at different times, and sort of let them rest and ramp down in their consumption, and then sort of wake them up when they need to be woken up in the morning prior to people coming, so that the building is comfortable or useful when they come, but we're not trying to make the building meet crazy demands all night long. And again, planning for future solar, I might change that note for plan/implement some or some strategy to make sure you get to the 2% reimbursement. And then the incentive side is a whole lot of thinking around use and loads and batteries and firm commitments to 100% of the roof covered in solar, and even probably parking lots, and maybe even ground source heat pumps, and the list goes on. So that's really how to get to these different portions. And I think I'll go ahead and introduce this sort of generator conversation, and then I'll quit sharing so that we can all see, and then you all can ask questions and we can bounce around with the consultants about, really, I think our goal is to confirm that you want to stay in the 2% pathway for the MSBA, or if you don't, do you want to do away with that 2%, or do you want to do something better? And so on the generator side, it was brought up that we should look at different options for the generator in one of the working groups, under the understanding that by code, we're required to provide emergency lighting and things like boiler pumps and just protect the building from freezing and keep the freezers and coolers going and the IT rooms running. And from a minimum perspective, that's, about a 300 kW diesel generator, which, might be in the order of magnitude of $100,000 or so. And that's kind of a more typical, at least in years past, approach to generators. We started to see more buildings add additional components to that in the last couple of years. And so the next option up from that was option 2, and that's sort of what I label as the option 1 above, which is code minimum, plus the sort of school is open notion that that we don't have to send kids home. The generator can still do its job. It'll keep, classrooms running with ventilation, some selected power and projection in the classrooms, and HVAC for other selected areas, but maybe the auditorium and the gym and some of the other larger spaces that are not necessarily required for critical operations of a school during the day. Maybe we let some of those fall off the generator and sit with just the emergency loads on like lighting and such. So we think that might be somewhere around 750 kW generator, and it might be less than that, but frankly, we need to get into the design more to understand that. But an order of magnitude might be around $225,000 plus or minus. It's give or take. And then the third option is doing a full building generator that is the 1 to 1.5 megawatts there, and that there's a lot of variables on it, and one of the things that we shouldn't lose sight of is that doing generators of that size may result in some environmental requirements, either reporting or just registrations or something like that, where you have to kind of talk through it. And the fuel consumption for these, I was just on a call this morning that one of the fire chiefs from another town was sort of insinuating that a 2,000 kW generator might use over 100 gallons of diesel per hour. So it's a big thing, right? To get first of all, to get it there, and then second of all, to keep it fueled up in the power that it needs to make the building. And the rep order magnitude of that could be anywhere from $400,000 to $600,000 for the whole system. And there's different ways to do it, either parallel sets of 2 or one giant one. But the design team doesn't have any real problem with any path here. Again, it's I think the town has a track record of doing the full building, and we would support that if you want it. We just want to know what the building committee's desire is for that, so that we can plan for it and start getting it in the design. So I think that's all I have for now, and I'm going to stop sharing and turn it back to the committee for some questions. I know it's a lot. Hope you all are still awake and with us, but my team is here to answer your questions. And again, our goal is really just for you to, as a committee, reconfirm that MSBA's 2% reimbursement points is what you're after, and that's what we should be targeting as a design team and help you get there. So, with that, I turn it back over to Susan or the committee, whoever's most talkative.
So if there are questions, raise your hand or
Yeah, Susan, I've got a couple.
go ahead, Jack.
Those costs that you gave for the generators, was that the total cost for each one of the options, or was that the incremental cost from the smaller option?
Elise, do you know the answer to that?
Those are the total cost estimate.
So it was 100, 225, and 400 to 600K.
I would expect to see option 2 to be closer to 300, but yes.
I'll update that number, yeah.
All right, so 100, 300, 600, just in round numbers for now.
Yeah.
All right, and now my question is, I don't know who this is to, whether the school side or the committee, or what's the sense of this committee as to whether we want option 2 or 3? I don't think we want option 1, but do we want to have the full building capability, or do we want to just be able to maintain the building sufficiently so the students don't have to get dismissed?
So if I could speak up with Susan, I hopped on late, but I know Dawn Anderson's on here, and Jack and Jeff may recall this with other buildings in the past. We've kind of really just looked to Dawn as the person who's responsible for all the buildings to see what his preference is. And then, are you guys okay with that if I ask Dawn to weigh in?
I think that's a good idea.
Yep.
Donnie, I see you, your name here. Can you speak
Yeah,
up
I'm
and
on,
let
Jim.
them know your thoughts?
Yeah, so with our past experience with these buildings where the generators have always been set up just for emergency equipment, we always have that problem that if we lose power, we have to dismiss the building. You can't keep it operating. So moving forward, learning from that experience, we have always moved forward in the direction of getting generators to cover the complete building so that it operates as normal until the power comes back on. It is discouraging to see the amount of cost that these things are. We're talking about how efficient these buildings are and how less energy they're supposed to be using. But in order to put a generator on there, it's going to cost us several $100,000 more. Seems kind of puzzling. But my preference is to have a generator that runs the building so that we can stay in operation. You know, let's bring up another point as well, Jim. Talking about the fire station. If you'll recall, they sized our generator for a building to operate all the equipment in the building. But then they told us we couldn't add anything to the building because the generator wouldn't carry anything else. So now you've got a generator that runs a building. You want to buy a new piece of equipment, we're telling you can't because it's not going to work on your generator. I just don't want that kind of problem in the future when you can't change it.
So committee members, this is why I wanted Dawn to speak, because he knows these buildings better than anyone, and he's going to be taking care of these buildings for as long as he's willing to stay.
Mr. Salvatore, do you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Anderson, as I always do, and as Mr. Johnson indicates, usually has a good handle on these things. I also thought that it would be important to keep the building able to stay open for other town emergencies and other, if we had a significant loss of power and we needed a place for elders to come stay warm or something. I think that's important. I also wonder about the fact that most of these systems are going to be run electrically, that the idea is that you're not going to have either a gas heating system or an oil heating system. That's going to make is that one of the reasons the energy generation capability has to be that much higher?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit, but at least help me if I'm giving wrong information. Is that so what ends up happening is that you edge towards an all-electric building with very low or no fossil fuels, which means that your loads are a lot higher than maybe a building that has gas-fired equipment in it, and so that is a reality, David. You're actually absolutely right. So even though things are more efficient, there's more things on the generator itself. So
I have to agree.
Are there other questions?
Yeah, I have a few comments.
Go ahead, Jack.
Well, you just hit on one is, we're talking about all electric and it's coming in from off the grid. But we all know how the grid is being powered. So, I mean, I'm not going to get into the politics of it, but it's either gas or oil. So, but we're going to pay through the nose for electricity. Back to the emergency generator. I brought this up, been doing this for a long, long time in this town, and I keep bringing it up is, and this is a decision that the Board of Selectmen have to make, is we don't have one building here, and I think Mr. Salvatore hit on it, that can take, if we have a problem, as far as keeping the gym going, keeping the cafeteria going. So we should be at least looking is if we do have an issue where you have to house people for an extended time, that we should have a gym and an auditorium that would be heated and our cafeteria. And that's not necessarily part of the school, but it's part of the town. And that would be something that the selectmen should be looking at and recommending what they need through their civil defense. I think you answered my question because it's all electric, is that the fact that these VRF systems are electronically run. The other thing is, it appears that this building is going to be air conditioned. The issue is, do we need it? Or if we're trying to save the planet, is we all went through school, and really, what do you have, 1 or 2 days in your life that had to have AC? But the other thing is the other school's not going to have it. So now you're going to have one school with it, and you're going to have what about me situation. And one of the things I'd like to see from the consultants and designers is how much more to add the air conditioning point onto this whole deal versus just a typical heating system. And the other thing is, I'm thinking if this building's going to be so airtight, is you wouldn't have the fluctuations we'd all have in those June days when all of a sudden it gets muggy because the building's been sealed up. But that needs to be, I think, explored is, are we paying a lot for an air-conditioned building? If we're running school 12 months a year, yeah, I'd agree, but we're not. And that needs to be looked at too. And as far as the 2% to the 20%, at a minimum, we would have to know at least before I vote, to see what is the added cost to do all this stuff versus what is the savings in the long term. Is what are we going to save in energy costs? Because that's what you got to weigh in. If you told me it's going to cost us $1 million to put all this in, but over the span of 20 years we're going to save $5 million, I'd be nuts not to say go for it. And that before I could vote to say whether you go 2 or 20, I'd like to hear what savings is. And I understand we're projecting in the future, but at least do it on present dollars. Thank you.
I think Mike Fisher has his hand up.
Thank you. I just wanted to mention the central kitchen in particular. We now provide food for multiple remote locations other than our district itself. And with the net zero building in particular, we're dependent on electric. We're going to do away with gas or fossil fuels. So we're absolutely in our kitchen dependent on that electricity. So I would just advocate for a larger generator, at least to provide that reliable source of electricity if we were to have an issue and still had to provide food for all these remote locations. Just please consider the central kitchen.
I'll go to Jack Fisher. I'm not sure if Mr. Salvatore has another question, but if so,
I do, Susan.
Jack, go ahead.
Is the cost of the cost associated with a generator a reimbursable cost from MSBA?
Yeah, Jack, that'll be built into the overall construction cost. So that total construction cost gets applied to the way that MSBA looks at the total cost. So yes, it'll be part of what would be deemed eligible.
Okay. And then just to follow on what Jack Conway said, I think what's important is before we make that decision of whether stretch, MSBA or extended, I think we really need to know what the incremental costs are. I know you put some good numbers in there, for HVAC, for electrical and so forth like that. But in your next go around, I'd really like to see what's the incremental cost for the building as we envision it to be for stretch and the other two. So.
And I just want to interject. I think we have to be realistic on this question, and I don't know how much I'm going to get my hand slapped here, but the reality is that we have a schematic design estimate that's coming up in 2 weeks from now, and we have a schematic design package that's due in July. And we have to declare to the MSBA in both of the, well, first in the schematic design estimate, so our team knows what we're pricing. We have to declare what our strategy is and then document that to the MSBA. And before we can give you any hard and fast numbers on operations or anything like that, we have to actually go down the road of literally modeling all of this and getting the equipment in place, seeing how the models do, which typically doesn't happen until really the beginning of design development and things like that. So the process here that we're asking you to do is confirm that at schematic level, you want to keep going down the road of 2% and looking to achieve that. But I don't know how much additional data we're looking for that we can harvest in the next 2 weeks to without designing 4 different complete systems and sort of running around trying to chase that. So I think, I just want to be realistic on what we're talking about and what we need to accomplish in very short order to keep the deadlines going that we're under right now.
Okay, Chris, I'm just going to slap your hand very gently, okay? I understand that, but right now we don't have anything except some disconnected numbers that say if we go from the stretch code to the MSBA to the incentives, we don't know if it's going to be if it's going to be cost effective. I'm not asking for down to the penny or the dollar, but at least can you give us some ballpark that says if we spend $1.5 million to go ahead and implement this code, we're going to get this much back in reimbursement, and we would estimate at current costs that we would save this much energy over the next 20 years in round numbers, just so that we have some basis to make that judgment on. That's all we're asking for. I know, I understand exactly what you want. You don't have the time or the money, and it doesn't make sense to go ahead and build a model for a full bottoms-up model for all 3 alternatives. But at least give us some rough estimate, a ROM, so that we can go ahead and make a determination. As Jack said, if we can save $5 million by investing 1.5, that's a no-brainer. We'll do it. If the numbers are the reverse, that's a no-brainer too. So that's what we're looking for, I think. So if there's any way you can accommodate that, I think that would be very useful.
Mr. Salvatore?
Touch base with Compass, and we'll figure out a way to give you some data that's meaningful.
Yeah, like I said, it doesn't have to be to the penny. Just give us a ROM. That's all.
Mr. Salvatore?
Yeah, Mr. Fisher's question was similar to mine. I saw that under the MSBA +2, it said that we'd possibly get 1.3 million back, and I was curious as to how much the difference between the stretch code and that would cost us. I still feel like it's probably going to be a good incentive to try and reach. And in that, are you going to be able to reach that in Sharon, or like if you miss, is that expenditure just lost?
No, we'll meet it in Sharon. I'm not worried about Sharon, but I'm just highlighting that the bars are shifting, right? So what you did yesterday for one community, if you repeat exactly that 2 years later, it may no longer be enough because the energy codes keep going more stringent, and we have to keep shifting that bar to a more efficient building, right?
That's why you're saying you might have to add solar just to make up that difference.
For this project, correct. That's why I'm just sort of highlighting.
Gotcha. And so this cold beam or variable refrigerant system, are they like the Mitsubishi systems you see now in the houses where the condenser's going on at the top and they're sending the fluids through the building? Is that what's going on?
Yeah, it is very similar to that, but it's a commercial institutional grade version of that. And it does a little bit more than what you're used to seeing in a house or a small commercial building without going down into the weeds. It actually has, it transfers energy. So a room that's calling for cooling and a room that's calling for heating, they'll exchange energy. That's where they pick up the big efficiency gains. So where the real advantage is on the shoulder seasons where some rooms look for cooling and some are looking for heating, they actually exchange the energy, and that's where you really kind of gain.
And you're exchanging that through the refrigerant itself?
That's exactly right. The heat pump is it's a pump. It moves refrigerant, and it's one room would be the evaporator, one room would be the condenser. So it's the refrigerant. The refrigerant liquid is is exchanging the energy. So it's very small piping that runs through your building.
So to Mr. Conroy's question about air conditioning, it's really not going to cost any different.
It's the same system, just it's just running backwards versus the other direction. So it's it's already included.
Right, and so the cooling is not actually happening in some other place and piped into the room. It's cooling the air that's in that room.
That's right. That's right. But you could have like a shoulder station where you have the cold side of the school wants to be heated and the warm side of the school, the sun wants to be cooled. They'll exchange energy between those two spaces, which is what gives you the kind of the added comfort.
I would also say that that's probably good for virus protection as well.
Well, it's actually interesting enough that when you look at the COVID, one of the systems that's been really promoted is you try to do a decoupled ventilation system. So as opposed to a VAV system where you're putting air into all these rooms and then all the air returns to a common return duct that goes back to a rooftop unit just to be heated and cooled to go back to the space. These spaces, the air that goes into a classroom, that air is exhausted from the classroom and it goes directly outdoors without mixing with the other air. So you don't get cross-contamination between classrooms or adjacent spaces.
Thank you.
Heat recovery on that plane?
Yeah, all the ventilation that comes into the building, and then that same amount of air is being exhausted goes through an energy recovery unit that picks up the heat of the exhausted air or the dryness of the exhausted air in the summertime with no exchange.
Excellent. And yeah, I would just say, I mean, obviously, I think the appropriate goal, not obviously, at least in my mind, MSBA +2 is, I think the other one is, the price jump is so much higher, and I don't know what the gain is except for, having a different star on your building.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of jump back a little bit. And Chris, I apologize if I'm stomping all over your feet a little bit here, but it is electrically heated and cooled. But one thing we have to realize is this is not electric heat that we're used to in the 70s and 80s. It's not resistance heat. So it's not electric fin tube radiation that has a COP of 1. These are heat pumps which are 20% more efficient on a year-to-year basis compared to standard HVAC systems coupled with a gas-fired boiler heating the air. So I just want to kind of, it is electrically based, but it's not the electric that we're used to in the 70s.
I get that. I just have one more thing. Mentioning the kitchen, is the cooking fuel going to be electric, or is there going to be gas fixtures for cooking?
If it's a net zero building, it would have to all be electric. We do have the equipment to do that. If it's the middle of the road one, we could probably use some gas as well, is my understanding.
Okay, thank you guys.
Susan, could I just say one thing about the decision right now to go forward into schematic? Chris did have some numbers on the bottom of the MSBA selection versus the incentive selection. That maybe we can pull that slide back up again, because the 1.3 million in reimbursement that you get with the 2% far outweighs any of the modifications that you're going to do to get to that level of energy efficiency. And like Chris said, the code is going more and more that way naturally. So I think the team's recommendation was to pursue this MSBA plus 2%. One thing, I'm not trying to get away from providing numbers, because I'm sure if we did an exercise, we could come up with those numbers. But one thing that's critical on the incentives path is that the renewable energy has to be part of the project so that it can be modeled. So the town would have to make a commitment as part of the project to come up with some type of renewable energy source, whether that be solar, batteries, whatever that is, it would have to be part of the project. That's a critical part and a factor of the sort of net zero model, is that you are producing some energy to offset energy used. The other point that we've talked about in the past, and this is a critical point, any incentives achieved will also be looked at by the MSBA. So in this third row, in this third model, like David Salvatore said, it does ratchet up on cost quite a bit to get to this model. And it definitely will include some renewable energy source. So without looking at the numbers in a more detailed way, like Jack suggested, you can see down below that making some of these changes, like at $3 per square foot, at $2 per square foot, definitely will certainly not outweigh the $1.3 million reimbursement by the MSBA for the 2%. When you get into the incentives model, then there is data out there that we could get, because we do have some projects now that are net zero, or that are getting ready and they've been estimated at net zero, but the cost definitely goes up quite a bit. And there's no other MSBA incentives here to gain. And whatever incentives come from the utilities are definitely going to be looked at by the MSBA.
Tony, is this a decision we need to vote on tonight?
I don't think we're looking for a vote. I think we're looking for a consensus of the building committee, because like Chris said, whatever we do, we have to model it. You can't just pick a path and not be able to prove out. These are all performance driven. So you have to model it to understand how to reach the goals. They're not prescriptive. In other words, you can't say, we'll put this type of insulation, this heating system, we'll get this amount of solar, and we'll be there. You have to model it out. It's based on the performance of the building.
And one of the factors to that, just I see there's some hands raised, but I just want to say one of the factors to that is the orientation of the building, meaning how it sits to north, south, east, west, and the glazing. And fortunately, on this project, we were able to get an optimal orientation for the classroom wings, which are have the heaviest sort of use and response sort of intensity to systems. And so we think that modeling this is going to produce some positive outcomes. But if you want to know, if I'm just to the point here, what I would like to do is request that we move forward under the assumption that this MSBA's additional 2% of reimbursement points, which by reality is actually all those cost presentations we did along the way, Brian and his team have included and assumed that 2% is there. And if the committee will allow us to keep digging on that as the preferred option for the community, and in reality, that's kind of where we were targeting the cost estimates of the previous round. So what we're saying is, in essence, to get there, we don't think you'll see much of a bump in cost really with these systems in the next cost estimate. And so it makes sense for us to keep that as our target, keep designing towards it, keep building the data set, keep building the models. And then when we get to the end of schematic design and even start talking about the next phase, we can revisit this decision with more information and tell you, look, we've modeled it, now we have a little bit more data, we have a little bit more design into it, and we're confirming that it's good to go for all of the costs that we've had included so far. And the only thing you would decide is do we want to make that next big jump to pursuing net zero, or do we want to step back from having the additional 2 percentage points and go straight to stretch code and just do that? And so that's, I guess, if I had my ideal scenario from this evening, is to just say, can we at least be in consensus and confirmed that the design team is going to move forward under the assumption that we're sort of targeting, and target's the operative key word here, the 2% reimbursement for the MSBA, because we think we can achieve it all with the cost that comes with that, the reimbursement that comes with that. And then just keep track of it and keep monitoring it and keep giving you more data as we have it available. And that's what I think I would prefer out of this conversation, instead of a holding pattern that we have to get more data before we can be committed or at least moving in a certain direction. So we'll stop so people can see the participants.
Nancy had a question. Do you want to?
Yes, I'd like to hear what Tim Bonfatti has to say first. But I do have, I will go next.
Okay, deferring to Tim, go ahead.
I just wanted to add the question around the MSBA incentive. From our experience, we haven't had a project that hasn't pursued the 2% incentive. So, when we've done probably 20 projects. So the incentive is generally considered kind of the baseline now in terms of most schools, because you do get that money. That is definitely worth it, that 1.3 million. So I just wanted to add that while net zero is more of a reach, the incentive is definitely something that is kind of a given now, frankly, in the MSBA program.
Thank you, Nancy.
Go, Nancy.
Yeah, I guess a couple of things. I think that was my sort of gut feeling, is that your recommendation is we should look at the middle lane at least, and that makes sense to me. I think there's a lot of silence because as the education side of us have been listened to pretty carefully when we've been talking about things education related, and we really need to rely on people like Donnie Anderson and Jack for this decision. I think that it does make sense to be as energy as efficient as we can afford to be. So I do like what Jack Fisher's talking about, just some high level numbers, but I guess what I'm saying is, I understand the timeline. I want it to move forward. And what Chris Hay was just talking about seems right to me, but I'm not an expert. So I guess I do want to hear what Jack, and Donnie have to say about that approach. Thank you.
So the question we're looking at right now is whether we should proceed as Chris has suggested, looking at lane 2, if you will, and having that as pretty much our placeholder, monitoring the situation, and then making the adjustments as we go forward, whether we want to become more efficient or fall back. What is the sense of the group? Are there comments that anybody wants to add before we take a straw poll to see if that's the sense of the group at this point?
Well, Susan, I'll just say I think that Chris came up with a reasoned approach, and that is to, if you stay on that lane, and as you develop the costs, you present us with the additional costs, and at some point, we'll be at a point, we'll be able to make a decision as to whether we stay in that middle lane, we move up, or we move down. I understand exactly what you're saying in terms of the pressure of the schedule. I would respectfully suggest that if you go ahead and take all of the costs that you identified, both for the envelope, for the internal and the internal systems and so forth like that, and multiply it by the square foot of the building, I think it's going to come a lot closer to the 1.3 million than it appears to be. However, even if it was an exact match, you're going to save it down the road in terms of energy efficiencies, but it's impossible, and I agree with you, Chris, it's impossible to model that building right now and say 5 years from now we'll be saving so much per year. So I would go along with what Chris is recommending at this point. Stay on the middle lane, the MSBA plus 2%, and we just take a checkpoint at every meeting, and you fill us in on where it's looking.
So could I just propose that at this point we do exactly that, as Chris has described and Jack was endorsing. And I'm going to ask if anyone in the group has an objection to proceeding on that basis. And if so, raise your hand, please. Seeing no hands, I think we can report that the consensus of the group is that we move ahead in the middle lane and monitor accordingly.
Okay, I appreciate that, and I think you guys put a lot of trust in us when you hired us, and that's what we're here to do. So we're gonna, I think our team here on this call is gonna work hard to establish, you know, the appropriate response and the appropriate budget to get you there. And then as we have more data modeled and things that we can report back, we certainly will do that. So
okay.
I hear that loud and clear. So I think, and then on the generator, do we have a consensus on generator just before we let our consultants take off?
I just say school open and look at the other one.
Okay, so maybe target the middle road again and then have more data for the other one. That's what I hear from.
That's what I'm saying, yes.
Okay.
Does anyone else want to weigh in on the subject of the generator?
So is the middle road the one that's going to keep the school open the entire time? And like Dave Salvatore mentioned, we could use it for other?
No.
That would be our target, yeah, to keep the school open, but you might not have, say, like you might decide that the auditorium is not part of that and that you don't need the auditorium, but you're going to keep all the classrooms running, the cafeteria running, and stuff like that. But like if the students aren't needed in that space, then maybe we let it power down.
Then I'm not okay with that.
So I think, let me interject that the decision at this point is whether it's a keep the school open versus being able to use the building fully, particularly during an emergency situation, as some people were talking about having a cafeteria and the auditorium available and so forth, which is above the middle lane, right? So it's more expensive. And that's a decision that I think, do we need to make that tonight, Chris, or can we do the same thing? Look at the keep the school open model and adjust as we go along, or do we need to come to a conclusion on it?
It's out there in the world, and I think before we go to cost estimates, which is in 2 weeks, I would like to have something that we're estimating towards, and a structure that the electrical team can. So what it affects internally in the building, believe it or not, is space, because you have different panel arrangements inside the building when you start talking about these standby powers and emergency power panels. Which, by the way, you still have to separate, and I'm speaking for Elise on this, but she can chime in anytime, but you still have to separate your technical emergency functions from the rest of the building, I believe, right? Elise, is that?
Correct.
Yeah, so it ends up having an implication on your electric rooms on the size and then separation, because those emergency power rooms have to be rated walls and things like that. So there's an implication there, and then there's other implications for distribution and circuiting that are assumed or at least diagrammed at schematic design. So I think that it seems to me that there's a strong sense in the town to have the entire building on the generator. And it feels as though we should target that for this conversation and this decision. And then if we find that there's some value engineering to be done because the cost estimates are too high or something, then we can return to the generator conversation and maybe make some hard choices at that time. But for now, I would say, just given what I've heard and having talked to Donnie, and the fire chief had weighed in at one point and said he recommends a full building. And so I think that given what I've heard, I think that maybe the prudent decision is to target the full building generator, have a good hard look at that. And then if we need to make hard decisions later, we can definitely pare down with that.
So I would propose the same thing. Is there anybody in the group who feels strongly that we shouldn't adopt that as a course of action, given that as we go along, if it ends up being too costly, we can pare it down? If anyone has an objection to that approach, please speak up or raise your hand.
Go ahead, Jack.
I got a comment.
Who is it, Jack?
Yeah, to our consultants, how many schools throughout the state have 100% emergency generated power that you've over the last couple of years?
Tape has not done 100% power, percent of the building on generator power yet, although it's been, since COVID, we've been asked about it more. But at least as electrical engineers, how many have you guys done?
I personally have done none with the full building, but I will also admit this is my first in Massachusetts building that I've been a part of.
Yeah, Chris, just speaking for AEI as well, we haven't done any that, over the past 10 years that I've been involved with.
Yeah, we haven't done it either. But I think that we could, I think you'll see it's a significant price difference between just in the school. So we could price it, Chris, price it both ways.
Yeah, I think what I wanted to do was get a price for the more cumbersome one, because it does have spatial impacts, and see how that impacts the building and gross square footage and stuff like that. And then get a price for the downsizing and say, you know what I mean? I think that kind of feels, because if you started with the downsized one and then you decided you wanted to make the jump, and I've got to then find the gross square footage to get the building to work out, I think feels like a big train wreck at the last minute that I don't necessarily want to have to go down.
Next week,
not extra next week. Space than less space. So.
Hey, Chris, at the next building committee meeting, we are going to talk about a VE list, a value engineering list. That we need to provide to the estimators of some different options to consider. So maybe this is the first one on our list. We consider going to estimating with a full one, and then have an alternate for not doing it, or vice versa. Maybe that's the first item we discuss at the next building committee of VE items to provide.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay, I'll repeat what I said earlier, and I'm kind of a little disappointed that nobody's talked to civil defense or anything else like that. Is we don't presently have a building that, if we had hurricanes or whatever, that could house people. And I've hopped on that forever, and it doesn't seem to come through. So if we're going to spend these big bucks here, this would be the one to do it on. We don't need just to turn the lights on and keep the refrigerators on, so that we have nothing in this town right now that could support. You always see it on the news. They're setting up cots in the gym and this and that. We don't have that. So I'm not naturally not advocating the whole place, but we need something from a civil defense perspective that we can take people in. And that is probably very important on this, as opposed to doing the whole thing or a partial. To me, a partial, forget it. I mean, yeah, you're gonna power your kitchen, yeah, it gets the rest of the kitchens going. But what do we do for the rest of the town? What do you tell people to go? And I can remember a couple of years ago when we had a hurricane or whatever, there were people coming down to the town hall and they're going to the senior center, and that wasn't looked upon very, and even the library. And this needs to be explored in exactly what your civil defense would need. To me, I'll throw out, you're gonna need a kitchen, you need heat in the gym, and any bathrooms and shower. I'm not saying the whole thing, but that needs to be looked at, because we wouldn't be doing the town a service if we're not looking at all those avenues to make sure that if we do have an issue, that everybody's taken care of. Thank you.
I think Donnie Anderson wanted to speak. Donnie, you there?
Yeah, I'm just, well, in regards to we have the ability to bring people to the Old Post Road School, which is completely covered. We have the ability to bring people to Elm Street School, which is completely covered. So now if you add the Bird School to this lineup, that would give you 3 buildings that the town now has that would be completely covered by generator that you could be bringing people.
Gee, that's kind of news, because when we talked about it before, Donnie, because I don't remember us powering up the whole Elm Street School and the old
Elm Street School generator covers the whole building.
Well, that must be an new one, and the same thing with Old Post Road, because when that was done back in the 90s, we didn't do that. So you're saying the entire building is 100% lit? And
I just added both of those generators to those buildings, and both generators run the entire building.
Tony, did you want to say something?
No, I just think Chris will definitely have to work on this with the engineers, because when we do a building for, we've all done the building that you use for the emergency shelter, but that's not a whole building generator. They provide, like Jack said, they provide the gym, the kitchen, in those areas, and they do not power the classrooms. So when we do schools as emergency shelters, there are selected panels that are in operation. But in this scheme, we're trying to do keep school in session. So if we're trying to do both, in other words, if we want an emergency shelter and we want to keep school in session, we probably are going to get close to a full building generator, because they're for 2 different purposes. But in the emergency shelter situation, it's not a whole building generator. I know we've talked about this a lot in user group meetings. The size of the schools that Donnie has just installed generators on are much smaller. So that's a product also of what we're talking about now with such a huge school. To power the whole school, that's a very, very big generator. So maybe, like we said, we can address this with some alternates and let them do the engineering on what a full one looks like. And then we can always subtract it or add more to it. But I think there's definitely more engineering to be done. And also looking at, Mike said, obviously the kitchen has to be on no matter what, if we keep school in session to keep the other schools. So it might be a product of somewhere where we're looking at part emergency shelter, part keeping school in session. I think some engineering will have to be definitely done to get to the right option.
Okay, I think Bill was next. Bill Buckley.
Through you, Madam Chair, I don't know if I have standing to talk, but I'm grateful for my 3 colleagues who are a member of this board, can do all the meetings all the time. I just wanted to thank Donnie for his comments as well. I would just say I'd love it if we could be as aggressive as possible in the approach to make the building as efficient as possible, and at the very least, perhaps you guys could look at least putting in place some sort of kind of baseline for maybe solar in the future, so we don't have to cut through the roof of a brand new building. If, say, we wanted to put panels on all of our school buildings, which I think some of the members of the committee now are looking at, once we get the kids fully back in school to explore in the years to come. So I think you talked about, which I really kind of keyed in on, is the MSBA's reimbursement, right? In the first go, and making sure these kind of pieces of the construction are in at construction, even if they're not fully utilized. So I think it might be good to, I'd hate to see, as buildings continue to evolve and the laws and strictures and what's expected of municipal buildings especially continue to evolve. I'd hate to see us 3 or 4 years after construction trying to attach some sort of solar voltaic or something like that. So if it could be kind of ready to go or ready to hook up, even if it's not part of the finished product on day one, if it's something that we could kind of envision, just as you sort of envision the need for the building to possibly grow 10 or 20 years from now. And I think you talked about that in one of your previous public hearings about identifying places in the building where you could sort of blow it out or add on, and the MSBA looking for that. I think as far as renewable energy concerns go, if you can't get it done, and I'd love to at least be on par with Sharon, and it looks like there's obviously a cost-benefit analysis that Selectman Salvatore and others have been very cognizant of, but I think it would be, I've heard from a number of members of the community who would love at least the baseline or the point of departure to be there in this building to move beyond it without kind of having to change it radically structurally.
Thanks, Bill. I think David Salvatore is next.
Chris, the building design currently is solar ready. To answer Bill's comment,
code.
Is that
that's code required. The
roof structure and conduit, et cetera, will be in the building.
Yeah.
David? Are you there?
David?
Yes, I'm sorry. I just say quickly that maybe if the town administrator and Mr. Anderson can kind of look at what our needs are. I was just hoping that is by having the whole school open, that would be enough in an emergency, just to at least have a place that's heated for a couple of days. Not necessarily a major disaster, but just to keep some seniors warm and stuff. And so my goal, just keeping the school open would be enough. And maybe Mr. Johnson and Mr. Anderson, and if Mr. Conroy or Mr. Fisher want to join them, just kind of evaluate what's available there and whether or not we need to make that extra step. At basic, this is a school building, and that's the most important aspect. I was just looking to have that extra little emergency use if necessary. So, thank you.
Thank you. Katya, you're next.
So Susan, can I just respond to that real quick?
Sure.
David's right on this one. So Chris, I know you and Brian, you guys are under the gun for this one, and you're hustling to get everything done. What's your time frame for us to kind of let you know, we want to go full maxed out on the generator or go this middle of the road compromise that you mentioned here? What's the deadline?
Can you do 2 weeks?
Yeah, I think we can get something together in 2 weeks. So okay. Jack, and Donnie and I will get together or something with whoever else wants to join us. We can get to talk. Does that work, guys?
That'll work. Yep.
Okay. Sorry to cut you off.
Okay, Katya?
Yeah, and I guess Jim Johnson, while you're doing that, I think our standard should be, what are you all going to be seeing in the next 10 years? Not what you have done in the last 10 years. We can't look back. We need to look forward. We're going to have this amazing building, and we're still thinking, oh, we haven't done that, or I haven't seen that. Then let's update what we have as opposed to build something new. So we should be thinking, what are you all going to be seeing in 10 years, 15 years? And that's what we should be getting.
Thank you, Katya. Boris?
Yeah, I'll comment regarding the generators in general. For me, powering the whole building would be a reasonable thing to do, unless it's cost prohibitive. The whole concept of having a building available for emergency usage would be great. Now, understanding that Elm and Post Road are such buildings where we could explore utilizing those for shelter in emergency needs, puts a question in my mind of, do we really need it? Do we need it at the middle school? What is the capacity that you're looking to cover? You have a town of 22,000 people. You know, what are you trying to cover from the particular schools? You're not going to be able to put everyone in even if you had it in the third school, you're not going to be able to put everyone in those 3 gyms. So what capacity are you looking to cover? And then secondly, if we're utilizing the school for emergency purposes, I'm not sure. As far as I've seen, you know, with all these other natural disasters and everything, when these schools are being utilized or these larger buildings are utilized, it's usually the gyms. Those are the ones that are usually utilized. Obviously, the kitchen would be great from a power source standpoint, but you're not going to need at that point in time power into the classrooms, because that building is not going to be used for teaching unless you're trying to use those classrooms for shelter as well. For me, if it makes sense to create a sub panel that you can basically split the power between what particular rooms are receiving the power, would make more sense. So that way you don't have to have full size generator when there's a need to power the entire classroom so that the students can still stay in school and finish the school day as needed if there's a power outage. And if you need it for emergency purposes, you utilize it for emergency purposes in those particular areas that you need it. So that's my thoughts.
Thank you. I think Donnie Anderson has been trying to weigh in.
No, I'm just listening.
Oh, okay. So I like
Susan, I'm sorry can I interrupt for 1 second?
Sure.
It seems like Jim and the others that he named are going to go away and sort of get back to the design team in 2 weeks or so. One important component that I feel like I need to clarify just out of due diligence so we can say we said it in this meeting is that we need to make sure that you're not asking us to build you a shelter, because if we're asking us to build a shelter, that has a whole lot of other different complications to it structurally and code-wise. You can use it to house people in emergencies and conduct emergency services, but you're not asking us to build you a shelter. Is that correct?
And that's correct. We don't call any of our buildings shelters. Okay. They're available, but we don't call them that because of the restrictions.
Thank you.
So just to summarize and move us forward, our Jim is going to get together with some other folks, discuss this, report back, and we'll be able to move forward on the question of the generator based on their analysis of our needs. Is that about it?
Yeah, thank you, Susan. And our design team, I think you all can log off and go about your evening. And I appreciate the committee for listening to all of this, and we'll work hard for you for the next few, for forever, but the next few weeks specifically, trying to wrestle this down. So thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
So can I just make a quick comment? I did have somebody that's watching that had asked a question, and since somebody asked a question, just wants to make sure that her question is noted. Is that okay?
So, sure. You want to tell us what the question was?
Yeah, there's a Linda Coletti that is watching and just wants to ask the question that said that I'm reading this, said to save the existing gym to save money, and she just wants that noted.
To save the existing gym?
Yes.
So noted.
Thank you.
Tony, what's next for us?
Next, I will share screen again, and then we will try and wrap up with the construction delivery method discussion, which Brian's going to lead.
Yep, thanks, Tony. So just following up from last meeting where we talked a little bit about construction manager at risk, which is chapter 149A, procurement law, how it differs from the design build delivery method. So we're coming back to you tonight with a formal recommendation. The Compass and TAP A both recommend the CMR Risk 149A for the middle school project. The reasoning, as we discussed at the last meeting, this project is a complex phased project on a very tight site with an existing school in operation. It's typically I would say almost a poster child for a CMR Risk scenario. We're not out in the middle of a green field somewhere with not another building around. Where you can have a design bid build and the contractor pretty much has free reign of the site. We need someone that's really going to be part of the team from the beginning and help coordinate the effort in designing the project, phasing the project, and then obviously being able to execute when we start constructing it. The other issue that we have, not only is it a very tight site to begin with, we have limited staging and laydown area in the grand scheme of things. There's not a whole lot of space outside of where the building is actually going to be because of the school, the existing fields, and where we're going to put temporary parking. So there will be some space up along the entry drive and then along the new road out to East Street, potentially for construction activity. So it's going to be very tight. We need someone that's able to be very proactive and flexible as things come and go with school operations. We also think an aspect of CM Risk that's valuable is the early release and the enabling packages. So once a CM is on board, we're able to release some of that work ahead of quote unquote bidding out all of the other work. So we can release some site work early, we could release concrete, possibly steel. But importantly, we could also release some of the work related to getting the site set up for construction. So if we're able to take advantage of that first summer or whatever the schedule lays out to get the new roads in, the temporary parking lot set up, move utilities around, fence off the construction site, we can get that done when school's out of session. So when the school comes back, it's ready to go. And we're not doing that while school's in session during the fall or the spring or whatever it might be. The other thing we talked about the last meeting is currently there's a larger pool of potential construction managers out there that do school projects than the more traditional school general contractors. There's only about 3 or 4 general contractors out there that do schools of this size. So from a competition and a pool of potential candidates, right now we're seeing more CMs, 10 plus CMs that are doing school projects of this size. Next slide, Tony. Another benefit is in a CM at risk environment, the way instead of a low bid that you get on bid day, you open it up and you have a number and you really don't know what is in that number. You're just taking the low bid from the pre-qualified most responsible bidder. You put together what's called a guaranteed maximum price, or a GMP, with a construction manager, and all that accounting is open book. So all the way through as putting together that price and then managing that cost of construction and billing that out, that is reviewed by us and the design team every step of the way. We know every cost that goes into the project. We see every bill that comes in for that project, and we're reviewing and approving those as we move through. The part of the scenario where it's CM at risk is that the CM actually provides a professional team for the project, and they share in the risk. Part of the way that they share in the risk is they put together a contingency within that guaranteed maximum price for things that they potentially need some additional funding to complete a buyout, potentially missed a detail during something that they brought up in their drawing reviews. But that change order is on them. It doesn't come back to the owner. So they're putting some stake into this project by putting members on that team, and then contributing part of the price of the project into their own contingency fund, so it doesn't hit the owner's contingency. They also provide pre-construction services, which helps with design reviews, looking at phasing, looking at logistics. This all helps owners' risk. The goal is trying to reduce the amount of things that are going to cause change orders that hit the owner's budget at the end of the day. And then also give you a better project, a safer project, again, reducing all those peripheral risks that come with a construction project. Another element that's an advantage in our mind is that the owner, Compass, et cetera, the project team, the designers, we're involved in descoping and awarding all of the subcontractors. There are filed, quote unquote, filed trade subs that still get bid, like the electricians, the plumbers, et cetera. But after they come on board, we're able to sit down with them and go through the scopes of work, make sure everything's covered, put together the final numbers that we need to carry in those categories. Maybe we need to add some additional monies to their bid numbers in the final budget. All of the non-filed sub trades, the construction manager goes out and gets subs to bring back in. We review all of those subs, we review all the pricing, we make sure the scope has been covered, we make sure that the budget is going to be adequate. when you get a bid, you don't know what's in that number, and they'll say, well, if I didn't carry that, that's a change order, or that wasn't shown in the documents, that's a change order. Part of the descoping is a huge advantage with construction manager at risk, because we're able to get in and actually speak with all the contractors and go through what they carried. Another advantage is while there's an upfront cost premium, so to speak, from a construction manager at risk, anything that comes in from a buyout savings, they budgeted $1 million to buy out the site work, and at the end of the day, the site work bids come in, we review them, and it only costs $900,000. That $100,000 can go back to the owner. It can eventually get back to the owner's contingency if it's not spent, or we can decide to move it to a different budget line item. Same thing with things called holds or allowances for scopes of work that aren't fully defined yet, that we think we're going to have to buy during construction, but we might not know exactly what it looks like. In a design bid world, that could be a change order, whereas here we have a bucket of money set aside for when we get to it during construction. If we don't spend it all, those monies can come back to the owner. This helps reduce and or reuse some of that initial cost premium that we pay kind of upfront in the GMP. So at the end of the day, or as we move through the project, we're actually seeing some of those cost savings return back to the owner. In design bid world, we get a low bid. If they get buyout savings, or if there's something that they don't spend fully on their budget, that's their additional profit. We don't see those numbers. We don't even know that they make that. We don't even know that they make that profit. Next slide. So just what we're doing right now on this project, what was carried in the PSR estimate, there's a pre-construction fee. So that's for during the design phase, design development into construction documents. There'll be a team from the CM as part of our team that'll help with that entire design process. As I mentioned, doing estimates, doing constructability reviews, doing logistics planning, whatever it might be, descoping the specifications, making sure that everything makes sense. Typically that fee is somewhere in the $250,000 range for a project of this size. That'll be determined. That's also negotiated as part of their, when we sign them up. There's a fee from a CM for a construction manager that they put on top of the traditional general conditions or insurance or bonds that we still have in a design bid. Typically it's about 3%. It can be negotiated. We've had them in the 2s as well. In the estimate that we did in February for PSR, that equated to roughly $2.6 million as part of the project cost. And then there's a GMP contingency within the CM's guaranteed maximum price that they're carrying for change orders or for additional buyout that they either underestimated or didn't account for as part of the guaranteed maximum price. We negotiate that percentage. Typically it's around 3%. But again, that's kind of like the first bucket of money that things could possibly come out of from a change order scenario where it doesn't hit the owner. And we carried about 2.3 million. So the initial cost premium right now that we're carrying is roughly 5 to 6%. About 5.1 million of the overall $92 million in project costs is related to the CM fees and costs. And like I said, some of these costs are going to get recouped as we do buyout and potentially have contingency balances that get transferred back to the owner. One of the mechanisms that we have in CM contracts is actually coming up with a schedule where, as we pass certain points of the project and we don't end up using all of the potential budget items that were in the guaranteed maximum price, or we got, through demolition and we didn't have any additional change orders, some of those risks have gone away. We can start to liquidate those saved funds, if you will, and get them back into the owner's side of the budget and the owner's contingency. So we can start to recoup some of those costs as we move through the project. So it's a big advantage. Next slide. And then just one of the touted advantages of a CM at risk is that it helps reduce change orders. It's difficult to quantify because you don't necessarily know change orders that you never received, et cetera, because we've fixed something in design and it never became a change order. All we can tell you is what we've seen on our last few projects. Typically on a new construction project, we carry about 5% contingency and construction costs of the overall budget. We talked about that earlier. When you look at some of our last 3 CM at risk projects and where change orders came in, change orders meaning that the owner had to pay for them on our Hopkinton project was roughly 1.7%. So not 5%, about 1.7%, but 45% of those change orders were actual owner's requests. They wanted to upgrade something. They wanted to add something different. They wanted to change something. So under 1% of the change orders on that job were actually something was wrong with the drawings and it was actually a change order to the contractor. Same thing on Millis. About $600,000 at the end of the day were change orders to the owner, about 1.5% on that job. 44% of those were requests from the owner, changing something, improving something. So again, under 1% changes to the owner. On the Stoughton High School project, a very large project, 92 million, same budget. about 3.5% change orders on that job to the owner, but 54% of that 3.3 million were actually changes that the owner wanted to make. So about 1.5%, 1.6% were in actual change orders to the owner from the contractor. So if you're thinking that your contingency is about 5% when you start, what we've seen on our last few jobs is the actual changes generated from issues with the drawings or unforeseen conditions or things of that nature were roughly 1% with a construction manager at risk. And we think that that's, we think that that's due to that you're adding that team member earlier in design, you're flushing out a lot of these issues. Everything's open book, you're reviewing this all the way through, and you're really trying to mitigate those risks coming back to the owner's budgets. And just for comparison's sake, they're much smaller projects, much smaller budgets, but at the end of the day, the change orders on the police and the fire station, which were still very good projects, we were under budget, we managed the contingency very well, we had some big credits that came back at the end, but the change orders that were just document related that came to the owners were roughly 6 and 6.2%, and about 40% of those were actually changes that we made on the projects, adding things for the owner. So at the end of the day, change orders were about just over 3% on those projects as far as design related or unforeseen conditions. So almost double what we saw on our CEM project. So if you can imagine 3% on a $9 million project, you're talking 3.3 million in change orders to the owner versus potentially 1 million if you're at 1%. So we do feel that there are cost savings associated with change order management with CEM at risk. It's very difficult to quantify, but just some experience we've had recently. So with all of those considerations, we think it makes total sense. We don't recommend it for every project. We've not done it on every project. We do not do it on the smaller projects here in town. But we think on this project, it does make sense to go CEM at risk. Any questions? I know it's a lot of information.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
Oh, well, let's start with the last one, Brian. I think you're going to have to demonstrate to me, because being the building committee chairman, I don't recall us going that far over on the police or fire. The fire department had mega changes. Matter of fact, we did turn in money on the police, okay? So I would hope you'd send me something to indicate why we ended up like that, because that's basically, I feel, a knock on me. Okay.
Oh, no, Jack, this isn't over budget. This was just what the contingency was.
I understand, Brian, but I don't remember us having that many issues at least the fire station that we had to pay for. Okay. But
no, we didn't. No, we didn't. The contingencies on the fire station, the police station were higher than 5%. We had some bid savings that came in, and we put that back into the contingency fund. So the contingencies were up around 8% or 9% on those projects.
All right.
At the end of the day, it was only like 3% really changes.
I've done this since 1988, and I'm going to sound like an old guy here, but I've learned a lot in that time. And one of the things we've always done is make it 10% because we didn't want to go back to the town, because it never turns out to be 5%. Okay.
Yep.
And I don't think anybody here, and I'm going to sound like I know it all, knows more about CM and GC than me, because I worked in the GC end, the CM, and I still do work at the CM end. I want to throw out a few things so everybody understands. Is you hear that the GC is going to pocket the money. No, it's what he bids at. But change orders, here's the simple thing. Either it's a change or it's not. If he wants to claim it is and we don't agree with it, then see you later. You can take us to court. So we're not paying anybody anything more on the GC delivery method. And I'm going to go through each and every item so everybody understands, which I do even on my planning board, the fact that you have CM at risk, okay? Everybody, you've talked about turning back money. That's our money they're turning back. That's not money that this construction manager brings to the job. So that's all in the budget anyway. I know architects do not like general contracting methods because their drawings have to be perfect, and that's where we get into these issues. The other thing, the delivery method by the CMs, is you're talking about non-filed sub, which is usually less than half of the project. So the delivery method, whether it's CM at risk or GC, is typically you're going to have the filed sub bids, and they have to be bid out accordingly. So you don't get the opportunity. There's no such thing as reviewing filed subs. That's a rip and read. Here you go. That's the number. as far as so I'm going through here, the GMP, I'm not quite sure at what time the CMs will deliver it. I'm just telling everybody the pluses and minuses of this. You said there's only 3 to 4 GCs that could do this. That's probably pretty close, but 10 CMs. I just want to tell everybody here is once upon a time, about 20 years ago, we were approached by a company, Turner Construction, international company that wanted to start doing this. And they gave us our presentation. And after they left, my comments were, and I've worked for Turner before, is Turner is a big, like I said, worldwide contractor, and they were doing a ton of stuff for Fidelity. And my comment was, do you really think the town of Walpole is going to get the A team if they're working for Fidelity or somebody? No, they're not. That's one of the things about, we're going to be a one and done. And it's like human nature to everybody. We're not going to get the A team. And I've seen it every day. You don't get the A team when you're one and done. If you're a continued client, Boston Properties or any of the developers, yeah, you're going to get that A team. So that's just something else to consider. And like I said, low bid, it's on the drawings, it's on the drawings. And whether they have it or not, they bought the drawings, they own the drawings, and they would have to give us a reason why they didn't carry something or why the drawings are conflict. At the end of the day, I have never seen a GC type of bid be any worse than a CM. What I've seen is the jobs have become so big that it makes it impossible for the once upon a time GCs and going back 30 years ago to bid these. So the CM is actually, and I'm going to say it here, it actually makes it easier for our team because they're working with these people as opposed to when you do a rip and read for a general contractor, you got to have everything, all your I's dotted and T's crossed. It's a lot more difficult. At the end of the day, I think, Brian, you said it before, is usually CMs cost you a little bit more. And I think that was said before, which it probably is. The one thing I do question, Brian, is, and I'm pretty much done with my speech one way or another. It's the committee can decide naturally which way they want to go. Brian, you showed us their fee of 3% and their contingencies. What about the reimbursables? What is that? How much is that? Because you're paying for everybody on that job. You're paying for the last piece of paper and the last staple. So where does that come in?
Meaning like their general requirements and general conditions, Jack?
No, the CM's going to get his 3%. All right, that's his profit. But you're paying for the PM, the assistant PM, the buyer.
Yeah. So they issue their general conditions, and they also price the general requirements of the job. So they put forth a team, they put forth all the pricing. So we get to review all of that as far as who's on the job, their hours, the rates, and we come up with a number and we agree upon the budget for those type of things. They also have in there any type of those reimbursables that they might use, temporary facilities. We see all of that as putting that together. Jack is right on a bid project. You don't see that. You get a bid from the general contractor, and they carried everything that's supposed to be in the documents, but we don't know what they're spending money on, and we don't know if they're actually spending everything that they bid on, so to speak.
Well, okay, and I'll take it there, Brian. You say something, we don't know if they're spending everything, but how about and I'm on the GC end. I have to eat it if I didn't carry it. So that's kind of it's the plus and minuses of here you go. Someone gives you a price.
I agree with you. I agree, and I think part of the stress that can come on those projects is they do have to eat it if they miss something. And on a project where it's this complex, in our opinion, or at least in my opinion, projects that are this complex, where we're on an occupied site, we're working close to a school. Like the issue that we don't want to have come up is, hey, on the drawings, you showed the temporary road laid out this way, and it needs to move over, 5 feet because something's in the way, or the school needs to do this. Well, it wasn't shown that way in the drawings. Now it's a change order. So instead of actually working through a team to get that done, we're going through a change order process because it wasn't shown correctly, versus having a CM possibly in the team during design, laying that out, walking the field with us. We need to do it this way, lay this out this way, so it's shown correctly on the drawings. We see that as one of the advantages. I agree with Jack. If it's on the drawings, they own it. But when it's not on the drawings, that becomes a headache and a change order, and you're fighting with a GC versus, maybe a very critical situation of trying to get something done on a site like this. If you're on an open site and they can sit there and we can fight it out with them, I think that works. But our recommendation on this site, where we're going to need somebody that's going to say, hey, we need to move this fence tomorrow. They're moving the fence tomorrow, and they're not giving us a change order first that we have to approve. So
Well,
that's kind of that's our recommendation.
Brian, they're gonna give you a change order if it's out beyond the scope. Let's not tell everybody here that we're getting everything for free. If the road moves and it's a cost impact, someone's paying for that. If the fence has to move, if it's a cost impact, it's someone's gonna pay for that. So that, none of this is not a free lunch. But the question I have is, you gave us all the percentages of contingencies and their fee, but you didn't put in there what their construction cost is to man the job, the CMs. What's that running?
I can get a percentage on that, but it's fairly similar to what we're seeing in general conditions. It might be slightly higher than a design bid build, but you have to extrapolate out of what's in a DBB cost. So,
but I guess my point is, you showed us 3% fee and you showed us contingency, but I didn't see the actual pain of every white hot hat on that job in there. That's typically you should know it as a percentage. So what we're seeing now is not a full cost of a CM, but just a partial. We have their fee, but we don't have their people's cost to implement what we need to do. Is that correct?
I don't have it broken out to show a difference between the general conditions for the CM versus we didn't estimate it as a GC general conditions. I can get that number though.
Well, as I said, Ryan, I'm going to give you the pluses and minuses of all this. I've worked them both. I do know that when I was working general contracting, I did love rip and read, because, especially with filed subs, is you go fight your battle with the electrician. Not my problem. And even so, I understand the pluses and minuses of it. But I just want to point out, everybody, it's somewhat good, somewhat bad. And if anybody is not familiar with construction, the CM has been evolved out of like the 1970s. It was basically to get the job going early. If you're a developer and you got a building you want to build, well, you can design the foundations and the steel and get that going while you're worried about what color is going to be in the rooms on the 50th floor. That's basically how this all evolved. And I think that's the way the CM has grown too, is it allowed you to start earlier and bid out the packages. And I will agree that you do go through the scopes, and I do agree that you do have less change orders. Doesn't mean it's going to cost you less. It just means it gets captured during the scope reviews, which is fine. I mean, I understand that. I do it myself. You're going to probably get a better deal when you're trying to get a job, and yeah, you got to add this and it's like this. Yeah, you're not going to have the additional costs that you would on a change order. So that does work. So I'm giving both sides, and I just want everybody to understand that, so that, you know, you go one or the other.
Has a question here? I think the point we're at right now in this meeting is that we're going to have a vote on which construction method we want to have going forward, and the one that's been recommended is the construction manager at risk versus a general contractor. Are there questions before I ask for a motion for one approach or the other? Are there any questions?
Susan, I have a comment.
Go ahead, Jack.
I'm a bit troubled by this. I understand exactly what you're saying, Brian. I'm just looking at the numbers that you put up. Basically, what it is it's going to cost us the incremental cost to go with the construction manager approach is $3 million plus the contingency. So what we're saying is, are we willing to spend $3 million plus some portion of the contingency, which we wouldn't get back? We'll probably get a lot of it back, but not all of it. So are we willing to spend more than $3 million to reduce our risk on this program? And how is that risk? How does that show up? That shows up as change orders and schedule delay. And in my mind, I think $3 million plus to reduce that kind of risk with this kind of a budget, I think it's somewhat questionable. So, thank you.
I have a comment I want to ask Brian.
Go ahead, Jack.
Yep, thank you. Brian, as we did on all the other projects with you, we carry the contingency in our side of the ledger, correct?
Yep. We had an owner's contingency and a construction contingency.
Okay, so we're basically going to take that contingency if we went CM route and slide it to their side. Is that correct?
No, they're going to carry their own contingency to start. Is the GMP contingency that Jack mentioned. So basically, they're carrying a contingency on their side of the ledger. We would still have our 5%. The estimate that we've done still has our 5% on our side, plus the 2%. So to Jack Fisher's point is they carry that 3% contingency to start if there's something that pops up that they should have been responsible for through the design process or through their estimating process that traditionally could have been a change order on our side of the ledger. It comes out of their contingency first. And then we manage that as well. They have to get approval just like a regular change order. And if there's anything left over in that contingency on their side of the ledger at the end of the job, that comes back to us.
Okay, quick question for you, Brian. When is the CM hired in this process? Or I know the GC after it's all done, but when will the CM be hired?
If we did a CM, the process is we have to apply to the IG's office, and then we actually do a request for qualifications. We actually interview the CMs. We actually get to see their team, and then they would be teed up to be on board beginning of design development, which would be right after town meeting. So they'd be with us for the design phase.
Okay, so they'll be with us after the design phase. Okay.
No, during the design phase, after town meeting, but for the whole year of design.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, it's after the vote. That's what I was trying to figure. We're not hiring these guys before the vote.
Correct.
Okay.
So we would account for these costs, obviously, in the budget. If that's the way we want to go, we would account for those projected costs in the budget that gets presented to town meeting.
All right. Now that's what I was just trying to figure, because we don't have the money to hire them yet. So, okay. Thank you.
Are there other questions? I'm ready to entertain a motion for either the construction manager at risk or the general contractor approach. If someone wants to make a motion, please do so.
Just to keep this moving, I'll make a motion to hire the construction manager at risk based on the recommendation of the project team. I understand that there are pros and cons, but I'm going to make that as the motion.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Katja. I'm now going to, any further discussion before I take the roll call?
Yeah, one question I have, and I go to Brian.
Go ahead, Jack.
At what point does the GMP have to be done? I work with a lot of guys. The GMP comes after the grass is grown and mowed for the first time. So when does it come?
It's typically we're going to bid everything. So you still have to bid your trade contractors, like your filed subs.
Yeah.
So same thing. We'll have a bid day for those, and then typically we try to put together that GMP within the first month or two or three if we can. If it's straightforward, it's done fairly quickly. But yeah, you're right. There are jobs where it extends out for whatever reason.
And
usually it's within a month or two or so after filed subs.
And I'll throw this out to committee. Everybody understands we've been involved, my company, in a lot of Brookline schools, Devotion School. They kept moving the GMP. The high school is the one that's really killing them. And the final one that's involved is the Driscoll School. They bid everything out, including landscaping. It doesn't go until 2023. So they want to get a handle on it. And that's one of the problems when you keep pushing that GMP further and further. You never know the final number. So that's all I wanted to bring up to everybody. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call the roll. If there are no further questions, are there any? Okay. So the motion before us is to go with a construction manager at risk. It's been moved and seconded. If you're in favor of this approach, please say aye. Mr. Frisha?
Aye.
Mr. Salvatore?
Aye.
Lawson is an aye. Ms. Gallivan?
Aye.
Mr. Green's not here. Ms. Josephs? Jen, are you there?
Yeah, technical difficulties. My space bar wasn't working. Yes.
Okay. Dr. Goff?
Aye.
Mr. Anderson?
No.
No? Okay. Jack Fisher? Mr. Jack Fisher?
I'm muted.
I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Okay, sorry, abstain.
Abstain? Mr. Edward Connor? Mr. Connor? Aye. Thumbs up. Mr. Senek?
Aye.
Ms. Katya Santiago Taylor?
Aye.
And Jack Conroy?
What do you need? Me to push it over the top?
No, I just need you to vote one way or the other.
I'm just asking, Susan. I'll vote aye, or if there's a fourth way to vote, I'd vote that way, but aye. Brian, stop laughing.
That's a good one. I like it.
Have I missed anyone?
Yeah, I didn't vote aye for me, Bill Hahn.
Oh, I'm sorry. How did I miss you? I have sloppy notes. All right, let me take a quick count.
I did agree with you, Jack, that you are old.
I have 11 ayes and 1 abstain. No, I'm sorry. It must be 10. No, I'm sorry. It's 11 ayes, 1 abstain, and 1 no. For a total of 13 votes.
That's right.
Okay. I think that might be the end of our agenda. We're going to discuss upcoming meetings.
Yeah, I don't need to share my screen for this, but we do have an upcoming community forum that was scheduled for June 2nd that we're going to move. Instead of having it on Wednesday night, June 2nd, we are moving it to Thursday night, June 3rd, because of a conflict with an event at the school. So then the last order of business is we've been talking about changing the meeting for
7-6.
Yeah, 7-6. I'm just trying to pull this up. So we're moving this date 6-2 to 6-3, and we're trying to change this date 7-6. Here's the results of the doodle poll. It's just up to the committee to either stay on the 6th, move to Thursday the 1st, or try to do even earlier on Wednesday, June 30th. These are the numbers. They're almost dead even across the board for availability. So it's just a matter of the committee making a decision on which night.
Well, if we go by the doodle poll, Thursday, July 1st has the highest number. Does anybody want to weigh in on this?
First is fine for me, since it looks like my name's the only one that's in that yellow check mark.
Okay.
Tony, you're not able to be there that night?
No, yellow is if we do it on that night, I will be there. And then the green is wide open. I'll be there any night. Let's put it that way. So that's not a factor.
Well, you can do it from the Cape too, right?
Yep, you can do it anywhere.
Yeah.
That's where I'll be.
So why don't we do it on July 1st, since it appears that that's the
Sounds good.
number of people? Is that agreeable to all?
Sounds good.
Yes.
Okay, so I will change this date to July 1st. And then I will also make the change in the community forum. That was really all we had. You've seen this before, where we're at. These are the deliverables we're working on. Like tonight we worked on delivery system. and some sustainability stuff. So I will update this work plan and get it out to everyone, along with the final vote language for the ballot that was approved by the MSBA and sent to school committee.
And our next meeting is May 18th.
Correct.
Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Susan, before you adjourn, I have two quick things.
Sure, go ahead, Jack.
All right, I apologize in advance. I will not be able to be here on the 18th. So I'm going to ask two things to be addressed or to be taken care of either for the 18th or the following meeting. One of the things that's come up as a result of reconfiguring the driveways is the issue of the intersection at High Plain and East Street. And I know we've talked about this in the past, that Pulte is committed to fixing that intersection, making some investment in that intersection, but they're not going to do it until they begin work on the fourth building. And what I would ask is for Jimmy and Patrick to see if they can somehow expedite that, because I think that improvements to that intersection are going to be critical during, not just during when the building is complete, but during the construction phase as well. So I'd ask Jimmy and Patrick to take a look at that and see if they can somehow expedite that process.
Okay, Jack, I'll look into it. Not gonna say no problem, but I'll work on it.
Okay, I understand it could be a big problem, but see what you can do. And the other thing is for the first meeting in June for the projected tax impact, I've also said this in the past, all we've been presented with is a 30-year impact. I'd like to see a 20 and 25-year impact as well, too. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, anyone else have a comment or question? If that's the case, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second, anybody?
Second.
Okay, we'll do a roll call vote to adjourn the meeting. Mr. Fisher?
Yes.
Mr. Salvatore? Mr. Salvatore? Okay.
Aye, I'm sorry.
Okay, that's all right. Lawson is an aye. Mrs. Gallivan?
Yes.
Mrs. Josephs?
Yes.
Dr. Gall?
Yes.
Donnie Anderson?
Yeah.
Donnie Anderson. I'll circle back. Jack Conroy?
Yep.
Jack Fisher? Jack Fisher?
Yes.
Okay. Bill Hahn? I'm sorry, Ed Connor?
That's a yes.
Say again?
Thumbs up.
That's a yes, thumbs up.
All right, Bill Hahn?
Yep.
Boris Senick?
Yes.
Santiago Taylor?
Yes.
And we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, all.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Donnie, no more.